To be a parent is to feel low-key guilty a lot of the time. The stakes of raising up a good, happy, successful human are so high, and it feels like everyone's got an opinion on the optimal way of doing it. Wanting to do it well is normal, but seeking out advice among your friends or in books or on social media can just feed the feeling of exhaustion and fear that you're not quite doing it right, which might be why the beta parenting trend is striking a chord. It's a response to the intense helicopter parenting of recent years: less perfection, less micromanaging, more trust in your kids' resilience, embracing imperfection and giving yourself permission to be a human as well as a parent. You're about to hear from a psychologist on this trend soon, but I do want to hear from you. Do you feel pressure to parent in a certain way? How have you decided what standard to hold yourself to as a parent? With me is Christine Bagley-Jones, our resident psychologist. She joins me fortnightly for Head and Heart. Christine, if you were placing yourself on the Greek letter scale, where would you put yourself as a parent?
Well, it's funny because I did ask my kids this morning and they actually brought up, well, there's not just two parenting styles that they're aware of. They talked about soft parenting and the tiger mum. And then it made me realise it's not just a dichotomous situation where it's one or the other. There's lots of different flavours, and I'd like to think of myself as someone that responds to the child's needs. And I think the kids would argue that I have parented differently with each of them depending on their temperaments.
That is interesting. I want to dig into that in a little bit, but first let's talk about beta parenting as a movement. When did it first come across your radar?
I think it's been bubbling up for some time, and of course I've read a little bit about it. I guess they've always existed. Hippie parents, parents that are very in the moment, like to take their life slower, so naturally their parenting style will reflect that. But of course, I've seen it ramped up in the last couple of years, which in my mind makes perfect sense.
It seems to me, so if we're defining it as basically a backlash to really intensive helicopter parenting in a very judgment-free space, the idea of beta parenting just sounds like parenting as maybe a generation or two in the past and then further back in history would have called it, because if you have 7 children and are running a farm, you don't have a lot of time to be sitting down for 20 minutes with each child each night. Like, is this just sort of going back to what the realities of parenting were for previous generations?
Yes, I think so. Look, it's a lot about psychological flavours as well, and what we're focusing on in terms of what well-being equals for bringing a child up. And I always there's about 5 rough key elements a child will benefit from. And in fact, the helicopter and the beta parenting is a blend of those if you could bring them both together. So, yeah, I like when you said a judgment-free zone, because most parents are just trying to do their best, and there's often flack if they're doing a particular way and it's not in agreement with what social media is currently trending on. And I want to move away from all that judgment.
Talk to me about these 5 categories you were talking about.
I've put myself on the spot now. I have to remember them. Well, from a schema perspective, Jeffrey Young cited, that you need to have a secure attachment. So that would be where you spend that time with the child so that they learn that their life is safe and that you're there for them. There's also that need for autonomy and that free thought and that ability to make your mistakes and learn things maybe through trial and error. And then there's also the need for spontaneous play during a childhood, that needs to be executed regularly and not to be so busy that you don't have time just to be creative. And then also about being able to express how you feel. And that bit's interesting because I call it the Brussels sprout scenario, where the child can potentially say they don't want to eat their Brussels sprouts and they're upset about it, and the parent takes the time to let them express themselves. They might still have to eat the Brussels sprout though. So it's about expression. And then finally, it's the healthy boundaries and knowing, and that's again, a little bit helicopter, where you make it very clear where, the boundaries are. But also you can have that happening in any kind of parenting style as well. All these 5 can be infused into any style.
I'm thinking of them as being like dials that you might turn up or down depending on your child, like what you were saying before, that you say you've parented each child a bit differently. How do you figure out what your kid needs?
Well, it's not easy because they're not going to necessarily tell you. So that's where you sit with them and observe them. You also do a little bit of soul searching because you've been conditioned because of your upbringing. And a lot of people will either mirror their upbringing or rebel and try to do the opposite if they haven't enjoyed it. So being self-aware of how you are showing up and how you want to show up as a mother will be really, really helpful, as well as asking your kid, get feedback. Do you like it when I let you try to figure that out? Or you tell them it's good to make mistakes. Like, you celebrate things not going right for them because it builds resilience, flexibility, problem solving, all those good things.
You're listening to Life Matters here on ABC Radio National. I'm Teagan Taylor with our resident psychologist Christine Bagley-Jones for Head and Heart, our fortnightly chat. We're talking about beta parenting, this idea of parenting a bit more hands-off than what you might think of. You've been reading articles about helicopter parenting or intensive parenting, this idea of embracing some imperfection, trusting kids' resilience. I'd love to know how you have decided what the right parenting style was for you and your kids, or how you've seen this play out for your grandkids or your nieces and nephews if you have them. Nell says the perfect parent leaves something for their child to improve on. Another says Dobby, i.e. the house elf from Harry Potter, elevated non-matching socks to a fashion statement. But seriously, the message from an early childhood teacher: don't sweat the small stuff. Just get your child to school by 9 a.m, even if they change out of PJs in the car. Christine, can you relate?
Oh, completely. And I celebrate that because it also takes the pressure off the mother, because parents want to
father.
Or father, that's correct, yeah, parenting. And by being able to say, look, it's okay if your kid comes with their hair not brushed and half their breakfast is still in their hand, because then we get to enjoy the experience of parenting without automatically feeling like we've got to get every little bit correct.
How often are people coming to you, your patients coming to you, discussing this anxiety of being a parent?
A lot, because it's such a big part of one's life once they breed, and they've got that huge responsibility of trying to navigate a young person to adulthood. Even if they don't come to therapy for that express dilemma, it'll come up at some point, because usually we're time poor. Usually we are co-parenting with someone else, and there can be conflict around styles, and that's a common theme. If you've got someone that's more anxious in their parenting style, more inclined for that helicopter approach, and then their other parent is the opposite, it can be very anxiety producing.
That feels like a conversation you really need to be having with your co-parent, and not just with a third party or trying to work out just by yourself with your kid.
That's right. And in fact, if in an ideal world, you'd want to have these conversations before having the children as well. Like, how do you see yourself as a parent? How micro are you going to go? What's your appetite for letting them fail or have disappointment? Because often this helicopter approach, it's born out of empathy. You just don't want your kid to suffer, not realising that suffering is inevitable in life, and learning early on that they can survive it and keep moving is such a valuable lesson. So in terms of co-parenting, being on the same page is probably even more important than the style that you elect.
What are some tips for parents who are listening to this, who would love to step back a little bit, maybe cut themselves a bit more slack, but they feel a bit guilty about that?
And of course, guilt seems to go hand in hand with parenting. The first thing I'd say is you matter also. And I know for a fact that kids love it if their parents are thriving and if they're being good role models in themselves. And that has to include self-care. So if you're always navigating their life and making sure their timetable's on track and they're kicking all their goals and they're feeling fine, where's the time in the day just to nurture yourself, your relationships, your self-care, your hobbies, your interests? When you're thriving, the knock-on effect is they will often as well, because you'll have more bandwidth to be patient, and you're also showing them the importance of that balance.
Well, Christine, thank you so much, as always, for sharing your wisdom with us. Go without guilt today, I suppose, is the message.
Absolutely.
Christine Bagley-Jones, our resident psychologist. She joins me fortnightly for Head and Heart. Thank you for your texts too. Kate says, never miss a chance to kiss your kid, even after a fight, or if they annoy you or you them. Putting a kid in a car seat, saying goodnight, good morning if you can. Develop a kind and chill fallback position. You are their support crew. It requires self-discipline and self-sacrifice, but that's what adulting and parenting requires. Kate, your text has made me think of a time that my little girl was sitting in the trolley and she was